So, hello everyone. Today I'm going to be discussing and reviewing a very special addition to my IEM collection and very important for the upcoming reviews audio wise on this channel because this is the CrinEar Daybreak. Not hopefully, it's going to be the new benchmark for my evaluation of in-ear audio. And it's also special because it's a refinement, an unofficial refinement of an IEM that I really love, and I will discuss later. Anyway, let's talk about build quality first, and it's just a very basic resin shell with metal faceplate. I think it's filled resin. It feels pretty average, it's just a resin shell, it's nothing too special, but the 2-pin connector is quite nice and tight, and then the stock cable, not this cable, is also pretty okay. So yeah. Everything build-wise just feels like your standard resin shell metal nozzle IEM, nothing too crazy. Comfort-wise is really good. I mean, it's a relatively small semi-custom shell, so it fits really comfortably. And then both silicone tips, these short wider tips and these more normal sort of long bullet style ear tips are both very comfortable. I think the short wide fits a bit nicer, but both ear tips have been nice. I've also been using these with the TRN T tips, which are these little things. They are stubby like the short wide ear tips, but they have a narrower bore, which just brings forward a little more treble, and I will talk about that in the sound later. But those also fit really nice, and I'll probably be using those after I finish this review. And another important thing is that the nozzle has a lip within it. I don't know if you can quite see it. There's a little lip compared to a certain unnamed closely related IEM. So tip slipping is not a concern, which is very, very nice. Now, when it comes to sound, before I analyze the sound, I'm going to bring up 3 graphs courtesy of Astral from Giz Audio or A-Tech Reviews for these graphs. I will be showing the Daybreak with both tips on raw graphs and against my 2 targets first, and then also against a generic 10 dB tilt of JM1. Just so you have an idea of what my personal targets are for neutrality and preferences if you're used to looking at raw graphs. And then I'll switch to a screenshot of those 3 same graphs compensated to flatten out, just so that you see where the Daybreak lands relative to a generic 10 dB tilt of JN1, my neutral target based on JM1, and my preference target based on JM1. And then afterwards, I'm just gonna be leaving the Daybreak against my compensated against my JM1 neutral target up on the screen, because that's how I'm gonna be evaluating the sound. I generally mostly use my neutral target. My preference target is more there for comparisons, which I will be showing when those come. But anyway, here are the raw graphs, and then here are the compensated graphs. Pause if you need time. Alright, now on to the actual sound evaluation. Tuning wise, these are definitely one of the best out there that I've heard. As expected when Critical gets his hand on the 5128 and with people who can help him with the backend research. As for how I hear it, I'd call it a neutral, maybe leaning a very mild W-shaped tuning where there's a little bit of a vocal emphasis, a little bit of an air emphasis, and then a little bit of a sub-bass emphasis. So a W shape leaning towards like the upper mids, but like very mild, like very flat. So at least more neutral than fun, but it's definitely not boring, where it's still very lively and very exciting sounding. Now let's talk about the bass first, and against my estimation of what I hear as neutral, I would say the bass could be a little bit more reserved to strike true neutral for me. It just does sound just a tad too powerful. It's in line with my preference. I do like it, but if I'm listening to more acoustic stuff, the bass really does sound just if it's acoustic but with a supporting sub bass, just sounds just a tad overblown. But yeah, there's little to no bleed, very well controlled, and still comes across with plenty of thump and dynamism, and it just followed by a very nice supporting rumble as the graph shows, with that extra little bit of bass. Lower mids are also excellent, and the extra heft in the lower mids actually surprisingly didn't bother me, even though it's a region that I'm pretty sensitive to colorations at. It didn't bother me as much as the Hexa, and the lower mids heft didn't make the bass sound blunt or didn't color the lower mids in a way that I find sort of off-putting. And it actually made me reconsider and actually add that lower mids heft to my neutral target to align with JM1 a bit more, while separating my preference for a more flat 7011 lower mids profile on my preference target. Right. So yeah, I think the lower mids are actually really nice with these. Again, my preference for what I like, if I want some coloration in that region, I would go for something more like an SL224, an old school style tuning, where that 1K to 200 hertz region is just completely flat. This has a small heft, small lift, but that lift does make things sound more natural. But it doesn't make things sound blunt or slightly too thick like the Hexa, which is pretty surprising to me, and I actually really enjoy it. Now, onto the upper mids, and I'd say the upper mids are about as tonally perfect like as I could ask for it. It's very natural, engaging, lively, but never leaning harsh or glary. It's really nice in the presentation of the upper mids, especially because the lower treble is buttery. With the short wide tips, they're buttery. With the longer bullet style tips, they're still really like well done. They're not recessed, but to my ears they just sound smooth, and they just sound good in the lower and mid treble. So yeah, and then tip rolling to the bullet style tips and the TRNT tips just brings up a little bit of an upper treble. It moves the upper treble peak closer to where I could actually hear it. It adds a bit of airiness, shimmeriness, which I do really like. While these short wide coffee tips tend to leave that upper treble peak further up in the frequencies, and it still sounds airy, but it doesn't add a shimmeriness, detailed sort of sound to the overall tonality. And I think that's great because it gives you different flavors for the still excellent tuning that I think is really appreciated. But yeah, in conclusion, it's somewhere between my preference target of a brighter leaning sound and a more natural sound. It's very lively yet never distracting, and I just think it's really special. I have minimal complaints about aside from just maybe the bass could be reduced a tiny touch, but in reality that's what the reference is for, and I'm also really excited to get my hands on those. But yeah, excellent tuning. Let's move on to the quote-unquote technicalities, or what I would consider as subjective qualities. These sound dynamic, again, they're really good with that bass shelf, meaning that the sort of set in a sense of dynamism is going to be excellent. It's very well textured and just authoritative. It's very solid, very well bodied. There's a lot of texture in that lower mids. Yeah, I just have zero issues with the way that the low frequencies are presented, while the upper frequencies and the sense of detail are also very good because of that smooth treble and good tonality. It sounds transparent, very highly resolving, and there's just nothing distracting me from the nuances from a track, and it really reveals a lot about a track even with a simple sort of non-lossless playback. There's no weird dips or peaks that veil certain cues, and nothing off in the tonality that will distract my brain, which is really nice. And call it delusional or tuning bias, but I think this is among one of the highest sense of resolution I've heard in an IEM thus far. And it's also no slouch in the imaging and staging part, because the imaging is, about as laser accurate as expected from something that my ears recognize as neutral. It's very HRTF adherence, which means imaging feels more brain processed than just reliant on constant context clues. And then staging is average, but still has a sense of atmosphericness to it. It's average for an IEM when it comes to like how actually wide and deep it sounds, but there's an okay sense of airiness and atmosphericness to the staging presentation that I do appreciate, but it's still pretty average for an IEM. But you can't ask for everything. It's still an IEM at the end of the day. But yeah, just excellent overall in the quote-unquote technicalities as well. I again just have zero complaints. Moving on to the gaming perspective, it's, excellent. Probably one of the standouts on the IEM side, but I would personally still lean towards something more treble focused, which is where I'm gonna talk about the comparisons in a bit. I find that the extra airy atmospheric overtones being brought forward with a brighter tuning really helps alleviate the closed-in nature of IEMs. These aren't super closed-in, but because it's more neutral, I find that just those extra airy overtones aren't brought as forward and expand the staging as much as I'd want, compared to some other stuff for IEMs. And obviously it doesn't hold a candle to headphones, but aside from that, like, it's still so versatile and excellently tuned that you just can't go wrong with it. Directionality again feels very natural and brain processed. I don't have to rely on map context clues like the material of the ground that the enemies are walking on. Gunshots feel impactful and immersive, yet out of the way. It's never intruding into chaotic moments where you want to hear out for those higher frequencies. And then speech is also very out of the way and never intrusive. Just a very excellent tuning overall. And the conclusion for this IEM before I move into the comparisons is that it's a benchmark. It's about as much of a benchmark as I could ask for from an IEM. It sounds very natural yet lively and exciting in just the perfect way. The treble is beautiful. Everything is just so well done for the $160 asking price that I'm not gonna give a ranking or a score, because these are going to be what everything is held up against moving forward, as I want to do more audio reviews. It's an IEM that I'm gonna keep using for a very long time, and I'm really happy that I finally got it after so long of it being out. Just because I was just out of the IEM scene, and now I want to come back and actually talk about them, because I've spent quite a lot of time understanding sort of the nuances in sound, frequency response, and just IEMs in general. So I really want to share that learning with people, right? Onto the comparisons. Start off with the unnamed IEM, the EPZ P50. Don't worry about the art. This is a semi-custom copy that I got for myself. And bring up the graphs. The P50, to me, it feels going from the P50 to the Daybreak feels like going from a 560S to a HD 505, but in IEM form. The P50 has faster, more airy bass presentation that could come across as lacking dynamics, and has some treble elevation and quirks that makes it lean quite a bit more treble focused and sort of metallic and cold. To me, this is a coloration combo that I really adore. Again, the P50 reminds me a lot of the HD 560S, while the Daybreak reminds me a lot of the HD 505. It's a coloration combo that I adore, but it does come across sharp and blunt for a lot of people. The Daybreak basically alleviates all of these potential concerns, bringing forward a more dynamic, warm bass presentation, or not necessarily warm, but more balanced, dynamic bass presentation, and smoothing out the treble. Coincidentally very similar to what Sennheiser did between the 560S and the 505, two of my personal favorite over-ear headphones. If I had to pick, it really comes down to my mood, aka a coin flip, but the Daybreaks could technically be considered as the more neutral and versatile set, more widely appealing if you will. P50 excels in bringing forward treble nuances and letting a lot of the air atmospheric overtones come through in the recording, but I'm sure it's not a preference that I share with many. I would take the P50 all day for gaming though, just because again that airiness really helps gaming feel less claustrophobic when using an IEM. Just helps things sound a little more spacious overall. It's not major, but it is something that matters to me. And also I prefer the brighter tilt for gaming. But yeah, overall this is really close. Again, a coin toss. I really have no strong preference for either. But I do think the comfort and the lip on the Daybreak do make me want to use these more for music, while the sound on these do make me want to use it more for gaming. But that's about all the difference. It's just a very small difference that between deciding the Daybreak or the EPZ P50. Very small. The P50 treble is elevated but sort of slightly peaky and has some weird bumps and dips in it. That just makes things again sound more metallic and airy. but it's not as smooth as the 224, which is what I'm going to be talking about afterwards. So even though it does improve in the sense of resolution, it actually sounds slightly less resolving than the Daybreak, just because the treble is less smooth. So I feel like some things are slightly veiled, but it's still a coloration that I prefer. So yeah, I just want to add this at the end. Now between the Daybreak and the Myer SL224, which is my previous benchmark for neutrality and resolution, I would say it's relatively similar. My thoughts are similar to the P50 for the most part, but both of these now have bass presentation that I really enjoy. Very similar in the sense of dynamics that you get. While this retains the fast, airy character in the bass that I like from the P50. This is really neck and neck as well. I will still generally pick the 224 for enjoyment, as this is basically what my preference target is based on. But the Daybreak definitely comes across as more normal and more versatile sounding. The 224 still has some treble elevation, though much smoother than the P50, and has a more contrasty lower mids presentation that I really enjoy. Again, it's really a coin flip, similar to the P50. I would prefer these for gaming, while I would prefer these for just generally listening to music. But the technicalities are so neck and neck in terms of the sense of resolution I get. And so it's really hard for me to pick. It skews slightly towards the 224 only because those colorations in the frequency response happen to line up with how I like them. But really, it's a toss up, and for $160 versus the $270, the Daybreak kind of wins on value. But yeah, it's really close between the two, even though I consider these a really high resolution IEM. Now moving on to the next comparison is going to be something that leans more preference, and I'm going to be using this, and the graphs I'm going to show is actually my preference target this time, the Kiwi Ears Astral. Now between the two, I think the Daybreak will be on paper the better option, as it just sounds more versatile and widely appealing, but I also really enjoy the colorations on the Astral. Everything sounds technically better, they're more natural on the Daybreak, but everything just sounds more fun and contrasting on the Astral. It's another coin toss situation for me. The Daybreak really punches up, and I think it will be very hard moving forward to debate between the two in my collection for which I want to listen to music to, because again, they're neck and neck in terms of the perceived subjective qualities, the technicalities, if you will. But again, it's just a more natural presentation, but still fun, versus a more fun presentation that's still natural. It's a dilemma that I'm gonna have to deal with moving forward. They really do punch up that high. And then just a comparison with something with a similar tonality that isn't the P50, the Truthear Hexa. I'm not even gonna bother uncoiling these, because the Daybreak just kind of runs circles around this similar signature, but the bass and lower mid doesn't sound blunted and thick. These sound just so much more natural and open, and it also sounds smoother and more resolving, so with better bass dynamics. So just think same thing, but slightly more natural sounding with better bass, and it's also double the price. So yeah, it's gonna be up to you if you want to jump. This is still an excellent neutral IEM. I think it just leans slightly too warm for me. But for the most part, they're both excellent. Anyway, that's it for this review. Hope you guys enjoy it. It's my second really super serious audio review. And so if you have any feedback, please leave them in the comment. Again, these will be the new benchmark moving forward. I know my speech has been kind of chaotic in this video. I'm still working on my speech. But yeah, aside from that, that's all I have for you today. See you guys in another video. Have a good day.